Start right at the beginning. There we all are, my mom and my dad, and me indicated by the blue arrow. I was the youngest of 4 boys, and we grew up in a town called Peekskill, New York, which was in the Hudson Valley, right on the Hudson River. So you can see my house there at the bottom, indicated by the red marker, and right across the street was a probably 4 or 5 acre piece of land that was just wooded. And beyond that was a much bigger area and much scarier. But I can't stress enough how important it was for me artistically to have grown up right there with access to that wooded area, because it was an alternate school for me. I went to a Catholic school, which was very strict and had its own rules, and you needed to do what you were told and nothing else. And kind of the same at home. You did what you were told. That had its own rules too, but once I got into the woods, then there was a whole new set of rules, and I spent so much of my free time there during each season, different times of the day. It really taught me so much, and really played such an integral role in my development as an artist later on, which is obvious once we get looking at my work. Here is the oldest known piece of mine, magic marker on an envelope that I did when I was 3 years old. And my mother very proudly kept it and wrote on it that I was 3 years old when I did it. And she drew attention sort of proudly to the fact that it had 5 legs. And so I can claim that I really have always been a surrealist, even since I was 3 years old. Very early on, I must have been about 7, I guess, when this was taken, when this happened. I entered a citywide safety poster contest and managed to win first place in my age group. And here we are in the mayor's office. He's standing behind me there. And if you look at the poster I did, there's a dragon on there. So I was, again, already sort of dabbling in mythology and fantasy and the sorts of things that still appear in one way or another in a lot of the work that I do now. Favorite picture books as a kid was Where the Wild Things Are by Maurice Sendak. And if we didn't own it, I would take it out from the library. And if you don't know the story, it's a story of Max. That's him there wearing his fox costume. And he never takes that off during the whole story. So he's always half boy, half fox. And it's interesting that he's also wearing a crown, because crowns feature very often in the work that I do. But in the story, he's naughty, he gets sent to bed without his supper, falls asleep, and dreams that he goes to this island where the wild things are, which to me is a perfect Jungian reference to venturing into our subconscious and interacting with those dark parts of ourselves, those scary parts of ourselves that we tend to avoid. And in the story, he tames them and becomes their friend, and they're very sad when he gets back in his boat and goes home and finds his dinner waiting for him. So I really, really loved that story, and that too had a big impact on me. In high school, continued sort of gaining notoriety. I was voted most artistic in my class and was part of the yearbook council, responsible for putting the yearbook together. And I don't know whose idea it was, but I wound up illustrating the cover of the yearbook. And as far as I know, that's the first time it had ever been done. And I went to the Rhode Island School of Design and was intending to study graphic design, which I thought was a safe bet. But one of my professors talked me into transferring into the illustration department. Luckily, RISD had a European honors program where they sent 30 students a year to study in Rome. So I applied to that and was accepted. And while I was there in Rome, that really was the beginning of my interest in being a painter. So I fell back on my illustration degree and got a job working in the office of an agent who represented commercial illustrators. I was there for 10 years and taught me just about everything I needed to know about the business of art. I was lucky enough by then to start doing T-box illustrations for them, and they're still one of my clients. I've over the years done about 11, I think, different T-boxes, and last time I worked for them was a couple of years ago. So I'm still doing some illustration here and there. Photoshop had not been invented, so if a client needed a piece of art, kind of like the one you're looking at, they either had to go to an illustrator to paint it or draw it, or rely on a photographer to do something in the darkroom to come up with that sort of image. And there was also a big demand for artists who could work in the style of Salvador Dali. So this was another sample I did for my portfolio and threw in all sorts of references to Dali's work. That then started getting me a lot of work doing sort of illustrations that impersonated Dali. And this is a poster I did for Microsoft in that style, and the details on the left and right are taken from Dali's paintings. And you can see I incorporated a lot of them into this piece. So as far as my painting process, I'll run through quickly basically how I paint, which is a very simple process. Actually, I try to keep it as simple as possible. Here's a view looking down onto my palette next to my easel. This is basically how it looks every day. You can see that my variety of brushes on the right. This little container next to the blue cap, that's filled with a medium called liquid, and that's what I mix with my oil paint to make it more fluid. It also has a dryer in it. So on the left, you've got some source photos that went into this sketch in the center. The female figure is a combination of these two at the top, and then some of the bird photos that I used to add to the composition. And once I have the sketch worked out, I will print it out. Oh, and by the way, as far as the sketches are concerned, those are all individually scanned and manipulated in Photoshop to create the sketch that I finally wind up with. And when that's finished, I print it out and put it into my opaque projector and project that onto my canvas. And again, just trace the outlines of the sketch onto my canvas, and then I'm ready to get started. Here is my canvas, and you can see the projected and traced sketch on the surface. Once I have that drawn on, then I add what's called the imprimatura. Prior to that, I'll add 4 or 5 different layers of gesso, which is kind of a white acrylic paint on the canvas, sanding between each layer until I'm satisfied. The surface won't be completely smooth, but it won't be rough the way raw canvas is. So once I have that ready and the sketch transferred, I add the imprimatura, which is a very thin brown or gray tone onto the canvas, which I'm still able to see the sketch through that, but it allows me to start working on a sort of a middle tone and not that stark white surface of the gesso layer. I'm starting to add the first layer of paint or the underpainting. And every artist is different. Some artists will start painting at the top and sort of finish everything as they move down, almost as if you're drawing a shade down over a window. What I like to do is start blocking in color so that everything is covered in at least one coat of paint, and then just start adding layer after layer on top of that. And you can see it in these following slides as the layers are continually added. So I'm adding layer and layer, building up the flesh tones and adding a little bit more detail here and there. And I won't add any fine detail until the very end. And this is close to the end. You see I've added those tree trunks on the right and left, and they added the ribbon, and I would have been adding the details on the feathers, and there's the final painting. And now we'll go through sort of a little bit of a chronological series of works I've done over the course of my career. This is one of a series, sort of an ongoing series that I've been doing for a very long time, and each one is based on the idea of Flora, the goddess of nature, basically. And in each one, there's a woman, and sort of acting as a Gaia figure or Mother Nature, you could say. And each one of them are blending with and interacting with natural elements in a very comfortable way. Now, this one, The Prince, was done for a group show in Denmark. I believe it was the anniversary of Hans Christian Andersen's death. So all of the pieces, the theme was Hans Christian Andersen, and all the paintings were meant to reference him somehow. This one is based on a story of his. The story was about these brothers, I think 11 brothers, who were cursed by a witch, and they would turn into swans during the day and then back into their human forms at night. And they had a sister, and if she made them shirts out of thistle, which is very painful to do, if they wore the shirts, they would remain in their human form. And she was able to make the shirts for all the brothers, except she didn't finish the last one. So this was a great opportunity for me to again use natural and bird imagery combined with the human figure, which is another major theme running through all my work. So that was the story that I chose to illustrate for the show. The Sentinel. If you look, again, seeing this from across the room, you might think this was some sort of guard or knight or some sort of figure like that, but spending a little time with it, you realize that all of his armor isn't armor at all, and it's made up of eggshells. His chainmail is actually feathers. That scary sort of headdress he's got on is obviously a rooster's head, and the spear he's holding actually ends in a golden bird's skull. Here we have the saplings. What I wanted in this one was for those saplings around her to sort of give an indication of her being imprisoned in some way, that they were keeping her enclosed. But what she's doing is pulling out the dead ones, but she's firmly gripping the one that's alive on the left-hand side. So she's sort of freeing herself and connecting with that living sapling. And I was really happy with the way this one turned out too. The pinnacle. When I was doing this, I was thinking a lot about feminine symbolism, and obviously eggs fit into that. The color black is a very feminine color in a lot of senses. Instead of the tutu, she has the bird's nest in place of that, the white bird strapped to her head. You'll see a lot of references, we've already seen a bunch, to the use of ribbons, ropes, binding, that sort of thing. And it, depending on the painting, it could mean various things. St. Anthony, this is a painting, this is the only painting I've ever done based on a dream that someone else had. And a friend I knew, who I believe was a collector back in Virginia, told me about a dream he had about me, where I was suckling, not a pig, but some sort of little demon. And I thought that was pretty interesting, so I tucked it away in the back of my mind and eventually got around to painting it. And St. Anthony, there's a couple of St. Anthony's, but the one that this refers to lived in Egypt. He was an ascetic. He lived out in the desert, and the story goes that the devil would tempt him with beautiful women, try to frighten him with horrible wild beasts, one of them being a wild pig. And if you look at a lot of the traditional images of St. Anthony, it's St. Anthony the Abbot is who it is. He's very often got a little pig resting by his feet, and the implication is that he tamed this pig, which again, for me, was a perfect analogy to that Jungian idea of going deeply into your subconscious and facing your fears, the dark beasts that sort of live there, and coming to terms with them, and maybe even loving them. Here we have, this was another idea that was given to me in a way. The face of this figure is a gallery owner I was involved with out in California at one point, and turned it into an alchemical image, which in alchemy very much has to do with combining or taking base metals like lead and turning them into gold. And a lot of the imagery associated with that process uses the idea of the king and the queen merging and becoming one whole person. So what this is for me is an image of the king and the queen coming together. This, we're going back a little bit, this was painted in New York. When I turned 50, I'd always wanted to play the violin. My wife bought me a violin, and this was my violin teacher. And this was done for a prestigious portrait competition. And if you enter, the subject of your portrait needs to be someone you know. So I asked her to pose for me. And she had been going through some difficult things in her life at the time, which are referenced in the knotted up twine necklace that she has on in the background. And she managed to work all of that out, and used the 4 strings of the violin to indicate that as it passes over her shoulder and becomes disentangled. And I should say about the background too, I went through a phase where I was really trying to, and I think that was part of moving to, well, no, this was still done in New York, where I tried to bring, I was trying to bring more color into my work again and loosen up at the same time. So that accounts for that very colorful, brushy background behind her. The veil, pretty self-explanatory. The thing about this one was that I needed to paint the figure in the background entirely before I could paint the veil. And it took all my courage to paint the veil because the chances of ruining the painting were pretty high. So I had to sort of take some deep breaths before trying to paint that, and it worked out. So I was really happy with the way it did work out. And the model for this one was a dancer who I asked to pose for me, and in the photo session, she just very slowly moved while I photographed her. So this was one of the sort of poses that she struck during that photo session. Gardener's Daughter. This is part of a series, sort of an unintentional series that has been going on for a while, where the painting, the title references a figure who's not visible. So obviously this is the gardener who we see his daughter here is not around, but she apparently has found a pair of his hedge trimmers and sort of graduated from working on the little paper dolls that you see down in the lower left, and decided to work up and managed to carve out the outline of a paper doll in the hedge surrounding the estate where she and her father must live. And also simultaneously, she's cut the cord to the little pull toy, the sheep, that sort of indicates that she's kind of cutting ties with her childhood, possibly, and growing up. And when I first planned this painting, I was going to have, instead of a sheep, I was going to have a doll lying on the grass, but it just looked too creepy, so I had to change that and turned it into that sheep. When 7 or 1, this one gets kind of esoteric, but to make a long story short, the title refers to the idea of the music of the spheres, or planets aligning, and when that happens, that alignment creates a sort of harmony. So that's pretty much what I was trying to get at in this one, the idea of finding harmony, creating harmony. The face here, a lot of people assume that it's male. Some people assume that it's female. It's actually based on a photo of a woman. But that sort of confusion happens a lot with the figures I paint, that sort of androgyny, which I don't intentionally do it, but I like that happened. This one's pretty simple. Again, working from an antique photograph, but this was during that phase where I was using a lot more, a brighter palette. And if we were able to zoom into what she's wearing, that headdress, there's a lot of very loose, sort of abstract marks, brushwork, and I just had a lot of fun working on that. And the top portion of that headdress, those are dragonfly wings inserted in there. The wall, this again goes back to that idea of transitions. What we're looking at there is sort of the idea of, again, a Gaia figure or a nature spirit. She is part human, but her dress is made of moss, so she is part of the landscape. And she's sitting on a man-made brick wall, and with that mallet and chisel that she's holding, she's slowly chipping away at the wall, which happens regardless, no matter what we as humans try to construct, nature is always working to sort of undo it. If you've seen any photographs of Chernobyl, where the atomic nuclear accident happened, today Chernobyl is almost a forest. Wolves are living there now. It's completely taken over again by nature that has just moved in and sort of is reclaiming it. The Flower Girl. This one fits in a little bit with the Gardener's Daughter, where this young girl, in a very innocent, creative way, has sort of taken away all of the flowers from the rose bushes and adorned herself with them. And this, I think, is the latest piece. And I think you can probably put it together at this point in terms of what I was getting at. A lot of the same references are here, and I was really happy with the way this one turned out too. And I mentioned the royal animal paintings that I do, and these are 5 of them, and we're going to actually go through a slideshow for the next minute or so to show you some of the other ones. But this has been an ongoing series of mine for quite a few years. I've done hundreds and hundreds of these.
Went on down to the Audubon Zoo, and they all asked for you. They all asked for you. For who? Well, they even inquired about you. I went on down to the Audubon Zoo, and they all asked for you. The monkey's ass, the tiger's ass, and the elephant asked me too.